Hello, and I want to welcome everybody to Healthy Seminars. Today we have a webinar with Sharon Weizenbaum. We're going to talk about classical herb principles. And just so you know, YouTube does not allow us to say the word without having our YouTube being removed. We've had that already. So we call it our guest, the evil chi, or the virus that cannot be named. But Sharon, hopefully, she may slip, but hopefully she won't say it, because we've used that term, virus that can't be named, but we said it the right way, and YouTube killed the video. And so that's just because somebody who's running the social media only wants a certain narrative going out. And so if you're not the CDC or something, they're kind of killing your YouTube. So just so you know, that's why we won't be using the term. My name is Lorne Brown. I'm also a practitioner. I'm so glad you guys are here. I want to let you know that we've put together several resources for you on the healthyseminars.com/resources page. We have Conscious Tuesdays weekly right now. We have Throwback Thursdays. We have these webinars like we're having today. We have a bunch on telehealth. On Sunday, I'm doing a talk on how to survive and thrive during these times. We got Deborah Betts, Claudia Sigovitz, Kate Levitt coming in to do telehealth for pregnant women. So they're going to give you valuable tips that you can share online for your pregnant patients, because babies aren't going to wait. And then we have the company Jane coming in to talk about telehealth technology. We got a telehealth 5-hour webinar on Saturday if you're wanting to transition. So we're doing everything we can to give you a whole bunch of free resources. We also have our regular online demand and live webinars for CUs on our site. Our site is 25% off during isolation, so at least till April 17th, most likely will go longer. So if you just go to the resources page on Healthy Seminars, you can see all the free offerings that we're doing to support you during this time. And there are some courses there that you need to invest in if you want as well, but tons of free stuff. And our goal is to help you find the calm while in the presence of this uncertainty, and also to give you tools. So if you choose to keep in touch with your patients and you're going to start to do online consults, which I think the term is telehealth they're using, or telemedicine, that you'll have tools from what we're going to share with you in these free resources that you can take these and then start to use this in your telehealth practice. So that's our goal. All the stuff that we're doing these days, it's two main objectives, because people say the recordings are for 48 hours. Why is that? Can we have it longer? We have two main intentions here at Healthy right now. One is to create community. Actually, if you look at our resource page, our logo says community, unity, immunity. And the reason that's the case is we want community. So although we have physical distancing, I know the government's calling it social isolation. We're choosing not to use that word because it's not social isolation. Right now, it's physical distancing, but we can have social solidarity. We can have social innovation. And so this is about connection. And so we want you here like you are during the live webinar. It's not what we want to give you something like this and then you go watch it in isolation 4 days or a week later. That doesn't create community. So I'm about creating community right now. And the other thing is to give you tools. And so this is here to give you tools, whether it's to help you find that calmness because you're experiencing anxiety because of what's going on in our environment. So we're providing a lot of tools to help you find that peace of mind. And we're providing you tools that you can use for yourself, for your loved ones, or if you're still practicing, to support people in your community. So those are our goals, and community is a big part, which is why in a moment we're going to we're going to unmute you guys shortly so you can just kind of connect. And when you do this, it's loud and chaotic. However, it's funny, if you listen, you'll start to hear voices of people you know, and the Zoom will grab images and you'll start to show up. And that's part of that community stuff. Before I do that, though, I just want to let's do that and then we'll introduce Sharon's talk. So team, if you can unmute everybody, and everybody just say hi to Sharon, hi to somebody, slide through the pictures.
Hi, Sharon.
And hi, Neil.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Hi,
Good morning.
everybody. Sharon. Hi, Sharon.
That's fine.
And you're doing this.
Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. All right. All right. So
That
let's
was
just
wild.
get ready. That was fun, eh? All right. We still got Sharon on here. I just want to. Oh, there she is. Okay, good. I see you. I just want to share. This is where we're going to put the recording. So on Healthy Seminars, Sharon has a bio page. So you see her. So if you go to presenters on the website, under bio, we're going to just put it right here around her, between the, where it says her courses are on sale, between her written bio and this coupon code, we're going to put the video here. So when the video is edited, because it takes us a little bit of time. So sometime our time on Friday, it will be there. And we're going to keep it up there for 48 hours. And if you're going to do telehealth practicing and you don't have needles anymore to treat your patients, there's so many things we can offer: diet, lifestyle, qigong, stress reduction. There's lots of stuff, the cornerstone of medicine. And for those that practice herbal, all of Sharon's courses are herbal. And we were talking earlier, I said to Sharon, if somebody wanted to really go into the telehealth and just really start to hone in on the herbal courses, where do they start and what do you recommend? And so Clarifying Diagnosis gives you the principles, the basis. So I just want to share, all these are on sale. And then I like her Naughty Disease course, but all these have this. And then she has a couple on classical formulas. So I just want to let you know that there's lots of places for you to improve your herbal prescribing. Now, for this talk today, I want to also remind you that this is for educational purposes only. This is not going to be medical advice. This is not medical advice. And as usual, if you have a health issue, please seek out a healthcare provider. This is for educational and entertainment purposes. So I'm going to jump off here. I want to remind you guys that you can type in the chat. At the end, we'll do a discussion. We'll take questions. And if you're looking for all these resources I mentioned, free and not, around telehealth and around these webinars and Conscious Tuesday and Throwback Thursday, on the homepage, halfway down, there's that Community Unity Immunity logo. Click on that, and that takes you to the resource page where you can find everything. Or just email us and we'll help direct you as well. All right, Sharon, if you want to share your screen, and then once that's going, I'll turn off we'll get you started. And Sharon's going to introduce this course. And remember, I'm calling this the virus that cannot be named. Sharon will have another name, but that's why we're not naming it, just so YouTube allows us to stay up. Sharon, please take it away.
Okay, thank you, Lorne, and welcome everybody. And I appreciate you coming. So this lecture is really going to be about some of the foundational principles that I'm using to understand this virus and to work with it. And I want to let you know that we've organized a small group of practitioners. We call it, I can't use the word, the Blank Club. And we're sharing cases and our experiences using the principles that I'm talking with you about. And so far it's been very encouraging. Every person has had positive results. And so we're also, as part of this club, we're going to follow up from this lecture with a series of more specific lectures about formulas. Because I'm going to sort of be giving some of the foundational principles that might lead you to different formulas. But if you feel like you don't understand how and when you might apply a specific herbal formula, we'll have a series of classes. I think next week there'll be 2 classes. We're not doing the Wednesday because of Passover, but the following week and for a number of weeks after, we'll do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, each time going over a different formula so that you can, hone your skills for being able to identify the pattern in your patients that matches these formulas. So we won't be going into a lot of detail about formulas in this course, except sort of where they fit in terms of the physiology and foundational principles, but we will be following up with that. what are our foundational principles? And this is a really important question. We're seeing a lot of valuable reports coming out of China about, different hospitals and what they're giving in response to the virus. And so there's a question like, so is this what we should use for our patients? And, there's various ways of approaching it that are being expressed from China. And should we assume that we should give these same formulas? But we also have to see that there are a lot of different circumstances coming from China. A lot of the cases that we're seeing are people that are in a pretty horrible acute situation, enough for them to be hospitalized, whereas where the strength of our medicine is really in the in-between time that I mentioned in a blog post, where when someone first gets sick and before it gets to that kind of critical point, we have a lot of power to help it change direction. So it may not be the things that we're hearing from China may not be the actual things we need for our patients. And we also have to question, how many of these reports are things that we can trust? And we all know, there are some things that come out that we can't trust and some that we can trust. And it's hard to know. Since we can't necessarily just do what they're doing in China, then what do we do? And I think the important thing is to really ground in the foundational principles of our medicine. These principles are like, how does the body work? How do our medicines work? And how do we diagnose our patients? And this is what we studied and know. And so we want to be able to apply the principles we already have. That because what they're seeing from China may not match what we're actually seeing with our own patients. So what are these foundational principles? What are our principles? And, there are so many different schools of thought in Chinese medicine. And so what I'm going to be sharing is the foundational principles I work from. And it may be really different than the ones you've learned or the ones that you're comfortable with or the ones that you're working from. But I hope to put across like why I have these as my foundational principles and how they relate to some of the other principles we might have learned. So the first thing I want to talk about is the kind of standard idea of what is the immune system. And these are some quotes. If you look up what's the immune system, you can get all kinds of information. But I think that these quotes sort of summarize our culture's general sense of what the immune system is and what it does. So I want to read these. The immune system is a host defense system comprising many biological structures and processes within an organism that protects against disease. To function properly, an immune system must detect a wide variety of agents known as pathogens, from viruses to parasitic worms, and distinguish them from the organism's own healthy tissue. It looks out for you. Your immune system works to root out germs and other invaders that have no business in your body. For example, if you inhale a cold virus through your nose, your immune system targets that virus and either stops it in its tracks or primes you to recover. It takes time to get over an infection, and sometimes you need medicine to help. But the immune system is the cornerstone of prevention and recovery. It's got agents standing by. Other than your nervous system, your immune system is the most complex system in your body. It's made up of tissues, cells, and organs, including your tonsils, digestive system, bone marrow, skin, lymph nodes, spleen, mucous membranes, and all of these help create and store cells that work around the clock to keep your whole body healthy. It learns from your past. You're born with a certain level of protection or immunity, but it can get better. Think of a baby or a young child who comes down with colds, earaches, or other everyday illnesses. Through this, they're making their own bank of antibodies as they're exposed to illness for the first time, enabling them to fight off future invaders. So we sort of see from this the the basic fundamental ideas that most of us carry about what the immune system is, what I want to point out is that there's actually a narrative here that I want to offer a different narrative, basically. And the narrative is that there's bad things out there, and they can get in and they can get me. The way to stay healthy is to strengthen my defenses so that I can keep bad things out. If they get in me, I need to attack them, kill them, and get them out. And my immune system is what keeps things out and helps my body fight bad things off. So the things that I just read sort of express this basic narrative. And this is a narrative I want to open up. I sort of want to say I want to question it, but really I want to open it up to other possible narratives. And and sometimes the way that we see the world is we're so used to it that we take it for granted that it's just how things are and not necessarily the expression of a narrative. And so, the narrative we have, it sort of ends up defining our actions, like what we do, because we have this narrative. And I just want to give an example from my life, which is I bought a farm a few years ago that I'm on my farm right now. I'm looking out over the pasture with some of my animals, and soon after I moved in and we started clearing away some brush in order to put up the fence for the pasture, a neighbor of mine got really scared, and she called the Conservation Commission, and we got like a cease and desist order, and it was very alarming to me. And there was a feeling of I'm being shut down, I'm being attacked, I'm being stopped from doing what I think is a good thing to do on my land, and the Conservation Commission is against me, my neighbor is against me, and and that was a certain narrative that it felt really true. The narrative felt really true, but luckily at the time I had some tools, probably from my Buddhist practice, to sort of be able to see it as a narrative and then have a question like, where does this narrative lead me in terms of what actions I want to take, and actually I'm just seeing my neighbor walk by, the one who I'm talking about. It's so funny. Anyway, is there a potential different narrative to have about it? And so I could ask the question, how is this happening for me and not against me? And thinking that way, I thought, well, it's giving me an opportunity to kind of come in contact with my new town and the Conservation Commission and open up communication with them. And then I also thought about my neighbor and realized it was really scary for her to have somebody move in next to her and kind of being afraid of what might happen, that she felt really vulnerable and scared about possible changes. I mean, the funny thing is, it's so beautiful here, and someone was thinking of buying this and turning it into a motocross track before I bought it. So wow, it could have been so much worse for her. But anyway, so I started doing metta meditation for my neighbor, and what that means is I just started imagining her being at peace, feeling safe, and sent really good energy just from my heart to her and in my own imagination, which really changed my body's relationship to her. And I just started communicating with the Conservation Commission. What do you need? What do you need me to do? What are your concerns, and how can I make sure I'm working in a way that brings harmony between us? And so now the Conservation Commission really trusts me. We're in really good relationship, and my neighbor and I are on such friendly terms. And so that's just an example of there's different choices we have about narrative, and each of them bring different possible actions. And, you know, and it isn't that, like, the first narrative was true on some level, but it wasn't going to be very useful. So in terms of our work with this virus, thinking about what is our narrative is really important. And I don't think that there's one narrative that is useful and another narrative that's not useful. What I think is that there are narratives that work well for certain things and other narratives that work well for other things. You know, so this narrative about there being bad things out there that can get in and get me has been super useful, because it has it's forced us to do the social distancing so that we've slowed it way down, which is probably going to save so many lives. You know, that the fact that it's much slower than it would have been if we kept on doing everything as usual. So, you know, that it's this narrative that had us do this. Like, we need to not spread it around, because there's something bad out there that can get in me and really mess me up. So, you know, I'm not trying to make a point about a better narrative or a worse narrative, but more that we don't want to take the narrative as truth, and that we want to be able to have some flexibility over what narrative we choose in different circumstances, so that we can be as effective as possible. Okay, so with the narrative about the immune system, though, you know, there are some things that I do feel kind of against. Is just the whole idea that we can give these protective herbs, you know. So this is a formula that this guy recommends. It's made up of, in pinyin, Lian Chao, Jinyan Hua Huangqin, and he says it activates the most effective healthy immune function for this particular viral pathogen. And he's recommending that people take this. And, you know, so when we get into the physiology that I'm working from, we'll be able to see why using these bitter cold herbs just across the board, one size fits all, would be bad for some people. And, you know, that there's no such thing as one size fits all, this is good for everybody, you know. So here's a bitter cold, you know, option that ultimately, if somebody is already cold and has a different kind of need in their body, this could make them more vulnerable. And then another thing that's kind of mentioned is everybody take Yuping Feng San, you know, and it's the jade windscreen, and it's sort of this idea of, you know, the immune system, that the narrative of the immune system we just looked at, you know, is let's build up a screen and help keep this out, and that's got to be good. And so one size fits all, take Yuping Feng San. You know, the previous one is more like, going backwards to this you know, this is like, we need to kill this virus, and these herbs will kill that virus. So the same kind of narrative, like, I have to keep it out, or I have to kill it once it's in. And another one is this is quoted: to wash away the virus, use the famous formula which was used extensively in China to protect against infection, and it's Gancao Ganjiang Tang. And this simple yet amazing formula warms and strengthens the lung qi, clears toxins in the throat, and strengthens the stomach. And we can look, here's a completely different, you know, protocol. Take hot, pungent herbs. You know, this is quite a hot formula, and also kind of a sweet herb that nourishes, and a hot, pungent herb. And so there are going to be certain kinds of people, and I would say we'll talk about like why this is affecting men more than women from this perspective, but I think this formula could be very dangerous for some people. So in other words, we want to have a kind of a definition of the immune system and really get that there is not one size fits all. So what are our goals? And so this is from Plumflower Herbs, that is selling products, you know, saying that their products are going to tonify the qi to protect from invasion of external pathogens, to discharge heat, disperse wind, and resolve dampness. And so they have this formula that they're calling the Wenbing Defense Immunity Formula, that supports a healthy immune system function and optimal health during cold and flu seasons. And this formula is made up, primarily of bitter and cold herbs. So, the question, like, is there really a preventative measure to take? And people are so scared, that we're looking for something. What can I take to make sure I don't get this thing, and to protect myself? And so we have to be super careful as practitioners to understand, what the herbs are, and to really ground in what our foundational principles are, so that we're working from those principles and not sort of making it too simple. It's not that simple. So all of these things that I just mentioned are still following the narrative. There's bad things, they can get in me. I have to be healthy so I can keep them out. If they get in me, I need to kill them or get them out. And just what is the immune system? And, some of these are like polar opposite from each other methods, but all of them being recommended in a one-size-fits-all kind of way. So you have to kind of have an eye for that and really question it. So how do I help my immune system? So it said in the beginning slides that the immune system is really complex and involves systems of the whole body. And these systems include respiratory, digestive, lymphatic, circulatory. So we could say that the immune system is none other than the sum total of the functions of my whole body. And so then that's sort of a question, well, how does my body function? How is my body not functioning optimally? And so basically what I'm going to be saying is, whatever your weak link is the link that needs strengthening. So if for example, every time I eat, I get bloated and distended and it moves through my body really slowly, then, how it's going to inhibit my ability to create healthy cells, and, then on the other hand, if I have asthma and I don't breathe very well, that's what's important to work with. In other words, everybody needs to be treated as an individual, that the immune system is not one thing that we can give one thing to support. So I feel pretty strongly about that. So now this virus, you all know I love classic formulas, and that I consider the classic formulas like that are basically the formulas that are from the Shanghan Zabinglong text by Zhang Zhongjing. And, there's a lot of questions like, can we think about this virus in terms of the Shanghanlun theory, or is it outside the scope of Shanghanlun theory? And is it that we need the Wenbing theory because it's actually more of a warm disease? So what kind of theory do we need? And is it outside the scope of Shanghanlun theory? And also kind of, do we need to integrate Western ideas? Like, I read one thing that said, Shanghanlun theory isn't enough because they don't have antivirals in their formula. So we need to have antivirals. So there's all kinds of ideas out there about what we need and what we should do. And, and there's quite a lot that this is outside the scope of Shanghanlun theory. So a question that I have is like, what is this Shanghanlun that's not enough? So it makes me think of a question that was asked once to a child. I was at a dinner table and the kid said, well, I don't believe in God. And the question was, well, who is this God that you don't believe in? And so the answer was, it's so stupid to think that there's some guy up in a cloud sitting on a throne. And it's like, okay, well, then I don't believe in that God either. but it depends on what do you think it is? Do you think that there's some kind of intelligence in life that knows how to follow the seasons and make leaves and acorns, and knows how to, transform our food into our flesh and blood? Like, there's some kind of intelligence in there. If that is considered God, like, oh, okay, I believe in God. So we have to have this question: what is this Shanghan Lun that people might be saying isn't enough to work with this? And so if you're saying this Shanghan Lun that's about cold pathogens coming in and from the outside and going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, then you're right, that Shanghan Lun is not enough. But that's not my Shanghan Lun. That's a pretty common understanding of the Shanghan Lun, but it's not my Shanghan Lun. So what I want to talk about is how I'm thinking about the Shanghan Lun, what the fundamental theory is in the Shanghan Lun, how it thinks about the body and how this relates to this virus. And then, think about, is this actually, quote, enough, with that question. So we have to question, what is the Shanghan Lun you're thinking of that isn't enough? So in terms of TCM and Wenbing theory about this virus, it's still following this narrative, the same narrative, that there's bad things out there. Now they're being called pathogens, and they can get in me and really mess with me. And I need to do my best to keep them out. And if they get in, I need to attack them and get them out. And so TCM and Wenbing theory is basically following the same narrative. And also, another part of the narrative is that the symptoms are revealing the nature of the pathogen. So we have different kinds of pathogens: wind heat pathogens, damp warmth pathogens, hot pathogens, toxic heat pathogens, cold damp pathogens, all these different kinds of pathogens that can get in me and mess with me that I need to get out. And the symptoms themselves are showing me the nature of the pathogen. So if I have, a yellow greasy coating on my tongue when I'm sick, well, that's telling me that the pathogen is like a damp, warm pathogen. So in other words, in TCM and Wenbing theory, the symptoms are revealing the nature of the pathogen. And that's part of the foundational theory in TCM and in Wenbing. And I'm sure you're very familiar with this idea. What kind of pathogen is it? Where is it? And how do I attack it and get it out? And some towards, how do I support the body to attack it and get it out? But still, that idea is in there. But it's really interesting if you think about it, kind of, what do we actually think is going on? Like, let's say we think it's a damp, warm pathogen. Do we think that there's this thing coming into our body and it's kind of spraying damp, hot stuff around our bodies? Like, what does it mean that the pathogen has that nature? Like, what's it actually doing in our body? Is it bringing in heat? Is it bringing in all this damp and spreading it all around? And for me, that doesn't actually make any sense. So I'm going to be looking at it from a different way and sort of questioning that. And I'm not saying it's not a useful narrative about it. It can be very, very helpful, but I think that the Shanghan Lun theory offers us a different narrative. So it's also kind of part of the modern TCM narrative that now we have to find and identify, what the nature of this pathogen is, what qualities it has, and attack it and get it out. But also, it's a virus, so we have to add antivirals. And if we don't, we won't have success. So I'm sure you're all familiar with this. And, my point is just really to for us to become aware of the narratives that we're bringing to this and really have some free choice. Is this is this how I want to approach it? And why do I want to approach it this way? So we're not sort of flung around like, these people are doing this and these people are doing that, and what do I do? How do I look at this? Just to sort of tease it out and see the underlying ideas that are there. Oops, I want to skip that. Okay. So the narrative that I want to talk about, that you'll see is different than this, is a narrative about, the world and life. I mean, the previous was about that, that here I am and I'm vulnerable and there's bad things out there that can get in. And, and so what we want to see is that that's a narrative and not necessarily the truth. And I'm not saying my narrative is the truth either. I'm just saying it's flexible. So the narrative I want to offer is about the nature of life as interconnected, and about health being about being in a workable relationship with life, and about healing being about coming into this workable relationship. So going back to the metaphor about my neighbor, that it could be this bad thing is happening to me and now they're my enemies and I have to keep them away from me. But it can be about, how do I come into relationship with that? And the fact is that this virus is actually part of our world, isn't it? And so, we could also think about becoming immune to things as being a process of our body making a shift so that now I can live with that without it causing me problems. That the illness itself is the process of me shifting so that I can now live with it. All the viruses that have been here, the flus and bacteria, are still around and they don't make us sick anymore. The flu that we had last year is still around, but it doesn't make me sick anymore because my body has learned how to live with it. And I'll tell you, that this is actually how I work with my relationship with deer ticks, that they're here. And so, I'm really lucky to have access to some foundational principles and then methods to work with what comes up in my own body and in the bodies of my patients. So I get many tick bites every year and have for 10 years. And, and what I feel like now is like, well, my body knows how to live with ticks. It doesn't bother me at all. I get a little sore and I feel like my body has changed so that now I can live in harmony with deer ticks. And so, and I don't ever tell my patients don't take antibiotics, or, I'm not fanciful about it. And I encourage patients to do what they feel makes them feel the safest. But on the other hand, a lot of the treatments that they're doing are not necessarily working to keep them well after they've been bitten by a tick and gotten sick. And so, their body has not learned how to come into relationship with this. And so the Chinese medicine with this foundational principles I'm talking about can help adjust their body so that it's workable. They can be in a workable relationship. And the fact is, we have to come into a relationship, and we will come into a relationship with this. And so the question then becomes not so much how can I keep it out of me, although that's a very important question, as I talked about, it's slowing it way down. But then there's another question, like, how do I help my body? When I do get sick, how do I help my body process this so it doesn't hurt me so much, so that I can come out the other side well and now able to live with it? And I think we have a lot to offer in this. So that's kind of a very simple summary like that about the narrative. I'm suggesting that we also consider, how do we come into a workable relationship with this? So what is this virus? It's something we're being asked to and forced to learn to come into relationship with. So there's no doubt about that. And from this point of view, what's the immune system in this narrative? It's still the sum of all of the body functions that all help me to be in relationship with life. And that when I become immune to something, the previous narrative is now my body knows how to fight it off. But another way to think of it is now my body knows how to live in harmony with it. It doesn't bother my body anymore because my body's learned to be in harmony with it. So then what are symptoms? I mean, this is like people are getting really, really sick. And so from this point of view, the symptoms tell us two different things. So I'm kind of countering the idea that the symptoms are showing us the nature of the pathogen and where the pathogen is. But the symptoms are telling us how my body's having a hard time coming into relationship with this thing. So the symptoms are telling the practitioner that, wow, this function isn't working to help you come into relationship with this thing. So the symptoms are telling me that, but they're also telling me something about the pathogen that's coming in, the virus, which is what demands does this particular virus make on my body, so my body needs to come into relationship with it. Because it has certain demands on certain aspects of the body. And that's where we can sort of come down to some key formulas that will help my body come into relationship with it without it hurting my body so much. And because it does have certain characteristics, but those characteristics from this point of view are the nature of the virus, like what demands it's making on my body. So we do have heat, we do have damp, but we'll have a different idea of where those things actually come from, rather than coming from the pathogen itself. So what are our goals when we're working with people? So my goals are, how do I help the body come into relationship with this? And so I diagnose how is the body having a hard time, and I'm giving treatment measures to help it function so it can process this very well and not kill me. So, yeah. So in this narrative, I'm seeing the body as functioning in a circular way. And so on the one hand, if we see this circle turning like a wheel, like that, we could see that our bodies are always living with nature. We are nature. Like we're constantly taking nature and life into ourselves and processing it and excreting it and also expressing it back out. We're giving back to nature through our actions and relationships and so we're constantly taking things in and putting them back out again. And so nature is like always coming into us. And actually, in order to be healthy, rather than thinking, how do I keep nature out? And this virus is now part of nature. Rather than thinking, how do I keep it out? Even if we try to do that, we're kind of stopping processes that are necessary for our life. And, one thing that I've seen in my years of practice is that the mindset itself of there's all these bad things out there that could get in me and I need to have these really strong boundaries to keep them out, that mindset itself is actually a cause of disease. It makes people ill. And, so the kind of posture you need and what you do with your own energy with that attitude is a cause of illness. So here, there's a picture of a wheel, and it sort of describes we take things in always, and it's in a vertical downward motion, and we take it down through our breath, through our digestion, through our pores, through all of our senses we're taking in life, and also through our hearts we're taking in, for me, from my interpretation of the Shanghanlun is, we're taking in the life force, which is warm, through our hearts, and it's coming in on a downward vertical axis to join with our bodies, where we process it, and then we also then give it back out to life. So we give back out to life through our excretions, also through our hearts, in terms of our relationships, our actions, and the things that we decide to create in our life. We're always giving back to nature. So I'm kind of suggesting that we just have this view of our bodies as constantly taking in and going out, constantly taking in, and that our ability to do this well is the mark of a healthy immune system and of health in general, our ability to do this. So there we go. We can see going out again, coming in, going out. In one of the blog posts, I suggested the image of a water wheel, picking up and dropping off. And so health is being able to do this well, and also realizing that health is having this permeable relationship with life, that we have to be open to life, we have to be able to take it in, we have to be able to excrete it well, and that problems come when either our body doesn't process very well, or when our bodies are, something is being demanded of our bodies that's beyond our body's capacity to process. And so certainly this virus is coming in with very particular demands. It's very demanding, and it's asking our bodies, to process something. And so where the herbs are very helpful is that they can very much help the body shift in a way to allow this to move through without hurting us so much. So diagnosis is then finding the answer to where on this wheel do I need help. So I'm talking in very broad general terms right now, and I'll get more specific. Where on this wheel do I need help? Let's see. The signs and symptoms are what give us the answer to that. How the person is presenting gives us the answer to that. So rather than the signs and symptoms telling us about the nature of the pathogen that we have to get rid of, the signs and symptoms are telling me, where on this wheel does the body need help to process this? And Zhang Zhongjing instructed us very clearly on how to interpret symptoms in the Shanghanlun. And it's my way of working. I was going to say opinion, but it's my interpretation, my way of working with the text is that the signs and symptoms are written not as you have to see these kinds of signs and symptoms for this particular pattern, but that they're actually written in a kind of a metaphorical code, so that the no sweating is code for the surface is closed, and thirst is, strong thirst is code for there's heat in the stomach. So we're not necessarily looking for those exact symptoms, but Zhang Zhongjing is trying to paint us a picture of the energetic of what's going on, as opposed to exact signs and symptoms. The signs and symptoms are very important that he mentions, but they're sort of giving us an overall picture of the dynamic of the particular place in this wheel. And you'll see this wheel is divided up into 6 spaces, and those, I chose a wheel that had this so that I could describe the 6 conformations in this way. So what is this virus doing to my body that, according to this narrative, it's demanding that we process it and live in harmony with it? And what are the symptoms? They show two things: where my body's having a hard time processing and what processing functions this virus makes the most demand on. And why does it kill people? Because their bodies couldn't process it in some way or another. And their bodies didn't get the help they needed in order to process it. And I think from a Western point of view, there's not a lot to help our bodies process it. I think there are some things like having a humidifier is really helpful. Mucinex can be really helpful. Robitussin can be really helpful. But, and those are great things. They are really helpful. And it does help our body through it. But mostly there is not a lot offered from a Western point of view. It's much more, if you get it, you're unlucky. We can cross our fingers and hope it doesn't get bad in you. And if it does, we can put you on a ventilator and hopefully keep you alive. But there's not a lot about how to help the body process it so it doesn't become so severe. And that's where we have incredible tools. And, so far for us, those tools are working really well to help people's bodies process it. So I want to do a little bit of comparing the Shanghanlun theory with the Wenbing theory. So in my Shanghanlun theory, which is not the theory of a cold pathogen coming from the outside and going deeper, 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 as opposed to a hot pathogen in Wenbing theory, my Shanghanlun theory is that the conformations, Taiyang, Yangming, Xiaoyong, Taiyin, Xiaoyin, and Zhuiyin are all different parts of this circle, and that they are functions in the body. They're not locations in the body, they're functions in the body. And they are all functioning to help me take in life, process it, and give it back out again. And so the conformations, the 6 of them, are always working together to help me, to help that wheel keep on turning, to help it keep going around and around. So that's my Shanghanlun theory. So it's not the kind of Shanghanlun theory you learned in school, and it's the kind of Shanghanlun theory, it's not the Shanghanlun theory that's being rejected as not enough. Because yes, that other Shanghanlun theory is not enough, but this theory, to me, is more than enough. The Wenbing theory, in contrast, is, go back, is that I have this immune system that I want to increase to keep things out. But if it's weak, there are these pathogens that get into my body. And my goal is then to get them out. So I want to point out that these are very different theories. And that a lot of the ideas about Shanghanlun theory are the paradigm of the Wenbing theory, that pathogens getting in, that I have to get out. For me, that's a misunderstanding of the Shanghanlun theory. And if you look at it that way, it's not going to work very well. The Shanghanlun theory is not going to work very well. So the Wenbing theory is just a completely different way of looking at the body, of looking at what the pathogen is, what it does in the body. And also the Shanghanlun was written over 2,000 years ago, and the Wenbing theory is very much relatively modern, from like the 1500s. And so, historically, we could, if we put a certain lens on history, we could see, the development of us and them, the development of inside, outside, growing. And so the Wenbing theory is much more that, looking at the Shanghanlun, well, there's cold pathogens that get in, but what about these warm ones? We need a whole new theory to take those into account. And I don't think that's true. In Shanghanlun theory, we definitely can have, all the pathology that's described in the Wenbing text, all the signs and symptoms that come, we can explain those signs and symptoms very easily in Shanghanlun theory. In addition, the formulas, which are awesome formulas that came out of the Wenbing school, a lot of those formulas are wonderful and very useful. We can still understand them with this Shanghanlun theory that I'm talking about. In the lectures that are coming up that a group of us are giving, some will be by me and some with some of other practitioners that are in our COVID club. Some of the formulas that we'll be looking at through this lens and trying to help teach you to identify the pattern so you can know when to give the formula, that some of those formulas come from the Wenbing school. So the Shanghanlun theory is not exclusive to using Shanghanlun formulas. In fact, it's my feeling that the more reductionist a theory is, the more it separates itself from other theories. And, it's either this or it's that. And the more open a theoretical foundation is and non-reductionist, the more it can incorporate other theories. So I think that this Shanghanlun theory that I'm sharing with you is a very open theory, and it can integrate Wenbing theory, and it can integrate even Western medicine. That yes, there's times you want to go on a ventilator, there's times you want to stay away from that pathogen, that the theories aren't mutually exclusive, and the more open a theory is, the more you can integrate other ideas. That's my opinion. So let's now, what we'll do for the rest of this is very briefly go through what these different conformations do in the body, what their function is. So if you think of the body as, think of the life force as warm, because when we're dead, we're cold. So what makes me a living being is that I have this warmth, and that warmth gives me animation, and it also takes care of all the transformations in my body. It depends on my body being warm. And if I don't have warmth, nothing functions and I'm dead. So the life force, we could say, is warm. We could also kind of identify that the life force is moved around according to the movement of the great yang, the Taiyang, which is the sun. So that my body wakes up in the morning because the sun comes up, and the sun zeniths in the south and sets in the west and goes under the horizon at night, and I get sleepy. I go to sleep. Hopefully I stay asleep all night and then wake up again in the morning. And all the theory in Chinese medicine from the Neijing is always about cycles. There's nothing that's linear in Chinese medicine. So the idea that the Shanghanlun is about something coming in from the outside and linearly going deeper, deeper, deeper until it's at the center and deepest, deepest level is kind of a contradiction to the foundation of Chinese medicine, in which everything is connected to nature and everything goes in cycles. So if we put this cycle idea onto the conformations, we start to be able to see some amazing things. So if we think of Taiyang as, think of that horizontal rod in this wheel as the horizon. And that Taiyang is about my life force going up and out. And so what is a Taiyang problem is when that up and out is not functioning very well. And so then what kinds of methods do we want to use if the up and out isn't going well? Well, we need pungent, warm herbs, often light herbs that are going to restore the function of Taiyang for going up and out. And so, then we can go through the cycle, then, okay, so there's that motion in my body. It happens in a big way in the morning, but it's happening all the time. There's always this up and out in my body, which is Taiyang. And, so then we have some subtle variations, difference between Shanghan or Zhongfeng, which is basically the difference between when do we think about Ma Huang, when do we think about like Ma Huang Tong versus Guizhi Tong, so there are different ways it can fail to go up and out the way it's supposed to. And the first lecture that's being given, I think on Monday by Sally Rappaport, is going to be like Ma Huang Tong, Guizhi Tong, like you've never learned it before. And so it's going to be really about these kinds of principles, so you can really understand what does it look like if it's more like Ma Huang, what does it look like if it's more Guizhi Tong. But for now, we just want to understand Taiyang as a function of going up and out. And that when we have a problem in Taiyang, it's not, there's a wind, cold, evil that got in my body that I need to get out. It's how do I restore the function of Taiyang? And, and you can choose the formula with that idea, like getting a wind, cold pathogen out, and you can be very successful. But I still want to kind of suggest these foundational principles. That if I'm suggesting, let's think about it as restoring the function of Taiyang, and just try that on for size. So how do we tell if it's a Taiyang problem? Like, meaning, especially with this virus, is it still on the exterior? So is the Taiyang part of the failure to function? And so I want to give you the things that I look at. Of course, we have lots of different things, fever and chills and sweating or not sweating, all those kinds of symptoms, sore throat, sneezing, all these kinds of symptoms that are all important. However, the ones that are the most important to me, that tell me in some way I want to restore the function of Taiyang, are the feeling of coming down with something and achy body. Now there's also the pulse, but we're not being able to feel pulses because we're doing a lot of virtual medicine. And so mostly we're not being able to feel pulses unless someone is getting sick that we're in physical proximity with. So, understanding these are very, very important. So this feeling of coming down with something is a very vague feeling. It's like you can't put your finger on it. Like everybody knows what it feels like, but you can't say what it feels like. It's like this general malaise. And usually if you ask people, do you have the feeling you're coming down with something? They'll be clear, like, oh my God, yes, I have that feeling. And often once it's purely now an internal problem, there isn't the feeling of coming down with something anymore. It's like, no, I'm not coming down with something, I've got something. And so, so it can be subtle and it can be really, I think, challenging to discover if somebody has this or not. So it's too bad. The pulse can be very, very helpful. And then also the achy body. So you have something acute coming in and you're feeling an achy body. And that can be subtle too. Just like I don't like being touched. It's not so much like my joints really hurt or I'm in a lot of pain, but it can just be like, ugh, I feel uncomfortable on the surface of my body. And that would tell you that somehow in your formula, you need to restore, to get the wheel turning again, to help the body process it. You need some kind of up and out method. And so what are the formulas? There are these pungent warm formulas that go up and out. So we're restoring the function of Taiyang. And, other things like chills or fever or sweating or not sweating, all those, they can come when the exterior still needs that resolution, but they can also come from other things. So we can't rely on those for that decision, that we still need some up and out. So this is how I work with it. And so we can see that up and out part of the wheel is the Taiyang. So then we have the Yang Ming coming next. And so if you imagine the sun is coming up and out, and now it's like noon. So that everything is really hot, and now things are starting to come down. So the Yang Ming is about down and in. And all Yangming pathology is about it not functioning to come down and in. You know, it says in the Shanghanlun that the Yangming is the domain of, the stomach is the domain of excess, the stomach being Yangming. And that means that everything about the Yangming is about it getting blocked on its way down in one way or another. Now with this virus, most of the things we're going to be seeing about it getting blocked on its way in and down are going to be in the chest area and also in the epigastric area, the digestion. So, you know, this question of where does the heat come from? Where does the damp come from? Here we can say the heat is none other than my own life force that is being blocked, so it gets built up and gets really hot. You know, if you suddenly blocked the sun from going down at noon and just kept it there, it would get hotter and hotter and hotter, right? And so same with Yangming. If it gets blocked with the life force on its way in and down, it starts to get really hot. And that is a big thing that happens with this virus. And this kind of goes to why I think men are more susceptible to dying from this than women, is that I think there's a certain kind of block in the chest that requires Herbologist, the herb, the gypsum, and that kind of block, you know, I've been practicing now for years, and it's like, it's so common in men to have this kind of block. And, you know, so I'm just realizing I shouldn't go into that so much right now, but it's really common for men to have that block as well as a Xiaoyong block, more common in men than in women. So often these kinds of men that have like a red face, a big chest, you know, and fullness below their ribs, you know, which is more common in men than women, they're going to have the hardest time processing this virus, you know, and that's what I think, but it's not really based on good evidence. It's a little bit of evidence, but not enough to actually draw a conclusion. It's like a hypothesis, I would say. And I'd be interested to see, like, what are the men like what are they like constitutionally who are dying more easily? And, you know, but definitely men tend to have yang conformations blocked more than women. And, you know, the yang conformations are all about things being open through and not blocked. And the yin conformations are more about consolidating and storing our energy. They relate to the zang, which are the storage organs. You know, so men in general are more yang, and so they have more of a tendency to blockage. Women have more of a tendency to deficiency, lack of storage. So anyway, with Yangming going down and in, we may have a formula like Bai Hutong. And so Bai Hutong, the chief herb is Herbologist, the gypsum, which in my way of thinking about it, gypsum is it's not so cold. It's actually, the function of gypsum is to open up the vents in the chest, heart, and lungs. You know, so it opens up the vents when they're all clogged up. And so I'm going to give you some quotes from some doctors that talk about gypsum maybe not being as cold as we think. You know, some people think it's like putting ice on the heat. And actually, if we think, why is the heat there in the first place? It's there because this area is blocked. Like the screens are all gunked up, the windows aren't open, and gypsum opens those screens. And it's amazing when you give a formula that's right for this. And it's like such a relief. Like the person is like, oh my God, I can breathe. Oh my God, I feel relaxed. You know, I was so agitated and hot and couldn't breathe. And now I can breathe. So, you know, lots of case examples from my practice of this. But, you know, take it at my word. This is what that herb does. And so, you know, we're not thinking about clearing heat. We're thinking about opening up this particular Yangming function. So Yangming is going down and in, and there's different kind of stations along that vertical axis. You know, there's the epigastric region, there's the large intestine, there's the bladder. You know, all the vertical downward has to be open through. And so there are different kinds of formulas for the different places where it's not open through. For this virus, the main one we're going to be thinking of is the chest and the epigastric area. And we want to know then, how do we tell if it's not open? And that's what we'll be doing, you know, when we go through the formulas. It's like, how do you really tell if it's not open? And, you know, so I had my first COVID case as a woman who called, you know, really having a hard time breathing. Now her chest happened to be full of phlegm that was very difficult to expectorate. And she also had a slight feeling of coming down with something, you know, very, very slight. And, you know, and she didn't have an achy body, but she just didn't want to be touched. So I knew the exterior is still not quite resolved, you know? And so, but also her appetite was poor. And when she could get phlegm out, it was yellow. And she was frightened because her breathing was getting worse and worse. So the formula that I gave her, is actually I'll talk about on the next slide, was the Maxing Shigantang, but I did it with Xiaoyong, which is on this page. It was more in the Yangming, it was in her chest, but it was also this phlegm heat that was in her lungs and also affecting her digestion. And so we wanted to open up the Yangming in two different ways, but I also wanted to go up and out in order to go down and in, because it was still there. So we can match our formulas to kind of exactly what's going on. And that was a case where, you know, I called her like an hour after she took the herbs, and, you know, and she said, oh my God, it felt so good. Like I could breathe again. And, you know, the next day, then we just gave her the next day just Xiaoyong because she could expectorate, but there was a lot of yellow phlegm. So that was going to help her process it for the next phase. You know, now she's better. You know, she's tired, but she's basically out of the woods with this virus. So these are the principles, the foundational principles that I'm using. You know, how can I help her body move through this? So, you know, and then also I want to say, you know, where does all the damp come from? Well, we could say that the virus makes a demand on the stomach and spleen that sometimes the stomach spleen can't handle. And when that gets shut down, we can't process our own body fluids, and therefore dampness develops. You know, so that's how I think about it, as opposed to it being a damp pathogen. You know, so, you know, just to offer that as a perspective of where this comes from. Because for me, like the idea that the pathogen brings in all this stuff and sprays it around because that's what it's like, doesn't make as much sense. When do you see the damp? When the spleen and stomach aren't functioning very well. That's when you see it. So I think, you know, you can look at it either way, and it's not, which one's true, who knows? But I find this a very useful way to look at it. So here are some formulas that work both with the Taiyang up and out and the Yangming down and in. And we'll be looking at these formulas in more detail in the follow-up classes that we're offering. So one of these, the Sanrentang, that comes from the Wenbing. You know, so we'll be interpreting Sanrentang through this physiological paradigm. You know, so just to show this is an open system, and it's not about which formulas you use, it's more how do you think about them. When you think about them this way, you can be very precise and very helpful. So you can see the up and out on one side and the down and in on the other. So then we get to, oh, this is just the quotes about Shigao. So I'll just take a moment and read these. The records of thoughtful differentiation of Materia Medica quotes Zhou Shu when he says, Shigao is most heavy substance, bright, shiny, and moist. After striking it to break it up, the particles scatter far and wide, and it breaks into vertical columns of slivers without a single horizontal thread. So if you go to the, gypsum mines, you'll see they're all vertical without any horizontal slivers. And so this guy says this is the reason its nature primarily releases pathogenic heat, which has seeped horizontally. And this effect is strengthened by its flavors, which are sweet and acrid. So we have this idea, with the virus, the life force is coming in through the chest and it gets blocked. And instead of going vertically, it goes horizontal. And it gets so full because that's not the pathway. No, the pathway is vertical. And if it's like a hose that gets blocked and it starts ballooning out horizontally instead of vertically. So we can think of Shirgao as opening up that vertical pathway in the chest. Okay, then Steve Clavey wrote, concern about the powerful clinical effects of Shirgao has been shared by beginning herbal physicians throughout the ages, but more experienced voices counsel us to know our tools precisely, then use them resolutely, as a faltering attempt with insufficient safe doses will often achieve nothing at all. This is not a recommendation to be, flagrant or flippant about our treatments, but also to understand our medicinals really well and when to use them at the right time. And so here, Zhang Shichun argues that Shirgao is not actually extremely cold, like Huanglian, Huangbai, Longdansao, Banlangun, Lianchao, all those bitter cold herbs. But at the same time, its ability to reduce heat surpasses these herbs. He bases his argument on the Shennon Bancao Jing statement that the Shirgao can be used in postpartum women with externally contracted heat. He's still thinking it's externally contracted, which I don't agree with. While the bitter cold herbs mentioned are all contraindicated, because there's a Juya Shirgatong is for postpartum women with nursing difficulties. Shirgao alone is not forbidden, therefore it cannot be extremely cold. He continues that the cooling effects of the bitter cold herbs drive cold from, sorry, that's written wrong, but basically allow the cold to overcome the heat, whereas Shirgao reduces the heat by, I would say, allowing it to travel out of the body, by opening up the vents. That's what it feels like in the body. And then we have another doctor talking about, I won't read this one, but basically he gave his kid all told 180 grams of raw Shirgao over a couple of days and without any upset to the spleen and stomach. So, now I've had years of experience thinking of Shirgao this way and realize it's so, when you use it correctly in the right circumstances, it never damages the spleen and the stomach. It's not so cold like those other herbs. At the same time, it's not really a clearing heat herb. It's specific for opening up the chest and clearing the heat in the chest that's affecting the heart and the lungs and drying up the fluids in the stomach. So you have to make sure it's the right location of Yangming, because there's different locations. And we'll talk in the future, how do we tell about that? So then we have Yangming not going down and in, and also the Xiaoyong not pivoting. So what does the Xiaoyong do? So if we think of the life force coming in, it's coming in to become our ministerial fire, which then goes up in our bodies like a fire under a cooking pot. So what has to happen is that fire has to be able to change direction so that it can now go up and out. And that pivot of changing direction is the function of the Xiaoyong. So Xiaoyong disorders are when that pivot is like a rusty hinge and it doesn't pivot very well. And certainly we know like Chai Hu Huangqin, how I think about them is they're awesome for making that pivot turn. And we can see if the life force heat is coming down the body and then it can't get into right relationship, it will build up and turn into heat. in addition, that ministerial fire inside is not going to be able to function well in the body. So the kind of quintessential Xiaoyong formula, Xiao Chai Hu Tong, it helps the pivot to turn so the fire can come into relationship. And then it looks at the next confirmation, which is Tai Yin, and says, wow, you've been missing my fire because it's been stuck on the outside. So now I'm going to help strengthen the spleen and the stomach that's been missing that fire. So it has herbs like Dangshen, Shengjiang, Zhigansao to help to strengthen the Tai Yin. But here we're looking at Yang Ming going down and Xiaoyong not pivoting. Like if that doesn't happen, that can be a really big problem for the body. And this is also very common in men. And so this kind of pattern is often, it's not so much the shurgao, but often if there's a lot of fullness in the rib side and a big distended belly, a big guy with a big belly and a red face, that person's going to have a hard time processing this virus, and it's going to be a lot at risk. So we have formulas like Da Chai Hu Tong, which can be so helpful. Dr. Hu Shishu writes a lot about using, Xiaoyong formulas to treat lung issues. It's very interesting, and I've used so many of his ideas, with this kind of physiology to treat acute respiratory problems. So it's very, very useful kind of way of thinking. So yeah, Da Chai Hu Tong, Chai Hu Mang Xiao Tong, or this double yang confirmation, Yang Ming Xiaoyong kind of pattern. So the wheel turns, but it also pivots and starts going the other direction. That pivot, being open and flexible, is the function of the Xiaoyong. Then also we can have Xiaoyong with Taiyang formulas that have been being very useful for our patients with this virus, like Chai Hu Guizhi Tong, it's like helping the pivot and going up and out. Or a formula like Chai Ling Tong, which is Xiao Chai Hu Tong with Wu Ling San, also can be very, very helpful. And Wu Ling San helps to steam up the fluid that's gathering. And so it can really be like a damp heat kind of presentation. So anyway, those are the yang confirmations. And those for this virus are the most important that we need to know about. And I would really like to give practitioners, you have a lot of understanding of Chinese medicine, and it's not a big shift to start looking at it that way, and just give you some tools for really being able to understand some of these formulas that used properly are being extremely helpful. So, then finally, we have the yin confirmations, and this is my last slide. And so the yin confirmations are all related to storage of the life force and being able to absorb and contain and hold the life force, where the yang confirmations are more about being able to be open through. In general, this isn't entirely true. I'm giving like broad stroke principles. Now, what I find is that with these patients, in general, with acute respiratory problems, I will be also treating the yin confirmations, but primarily in relation to the combination with Taiyang. In other words, helping them develop and store the resources that are going to help them go up and out. In general, if it's more in the Yang Ming or Xiaoyang, I'm going to open that up and help it flow before I'm treating the yin confirmations. But I will often treat the yin confirmations if they're weak in order to help kind of give that fuel to the up and out that's needed if it's weak, only if it's weak, not as a matter of course, only if I see it as weak. So that's it. I'm going to stop the share, and I'd like to open it up for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Sharon. That was great. So guys, this is the raise your hand part. That was awesome. So there's a couple housekeeping questions. People want to know, like, okay, how do I register for the other one? So we haven't listed them all. Sharon and I are going to chat after. My understanding, now this is written in stone, but my understanding, the next one is going to be by Sally Rappaport. And the working title is Ma Wong Tong and Guizhou Tong, as you've never heard before, using them for the virus that can't be named. Although we'll put it in type what the virus name is. So Ma Wong Tong and Guizhou Tong, as you've never heard them before, my understanding is going to be with Sally. It'll be at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, so 30 minutes before this. You will be able to find that on the Healthy Seminars resource page, and it'll also be on where we're going to create a page for a collective for this. This is healthyseminars.com/Sharon right now is where it is, but we may change that URL. So the best thing is go to the resources because they'll be listed there once we have them, which will link you to where you can register. And as you can tell, you're registering to get your Zoom link. It doesn't guarantee you get in the room. The first 500 get into the room, and then we keep it up for 48 hours, and we will stream it live on Facebook and YouTube. So if you can't get in, like some people couldn't get in today, you can just go to the Healthy Seminars Facebook page or YouTube page and watch the live stream if this is maxed out. So if you have questions, raise your hand. And I do want to remind you guys that Sharon's website is whitepinehealingarts.org. She's got amazing blogs. She has her GMP program that she'll be doing next year. I highly recommend. And on healthyseminars.com, on her bio page, if you go to presenters, this is where we're going to place this recording for 48 hours. And all of her courses are on sale during isolation at 25% off. Her clarifying diagnosis course is amazing. And if you have taken her clarifying diagnosis, her old course, which was around 19 or 20 CUs, this one is 54 CUs, much more comprehensive, we will take off the price of what you paid for it on the Healthy or Old Pro D site, plus you get the 25% off. So you can really get her course at a special price, especially if you've taken it before. And then all of her courses are Herbal. If you're going to do telehealth, then Herbal's amazing. By the way, Sharon, this was great. I love your analogies. I can't wait to review this again. I'm just sitting here. I'm like loving this. This is great. I love the fact it's not like this herb, this formula for the virus that can't be named. You're bringing us back to the foundation of the medicine. Lovely. Thank you. We're going to stop this.
Well, thank you. You know, what you're offering just in general, I think, is you're just doing a huge service to everybody with such warmth and generosity. And just thank you so much. I really appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you. And thank you guys for coming in. This makes it feel good to see that you guys want this, seeing 500 people in the room and then all those on Facebook and YouTube. That's wonderful. We got a whole bunch more coming our way. People have been contacting us. And so we're picking and choosing. If we don't choose you, I'm sorry, but we're just doing it with the idea. We want great content. And really my goal is community. So the idea of being able to turn on your mic to see each other, that's the idea behind this, is community. We got so much content that you could just watch on your own in isolation. So I'm not doing that. You can go do that on my site now. But I want community. So if you want to see Sharon, you want to see Sally, you want the Throwback Thursdays, then you come to the live webinar, or you got 48 hours to watch it. Why? Because I want you here. I want community. So Sandra, we're going to end this with turning on everybody's mics again, and you can send your love to Sharon and to your friends on here. Let's do this for 45 seconds and end the meeting. So go.
Thank you, Sharon. Sharon and Lorne and your whole team. Thank you very, very much.
Very good about all this
Hey, way to
information.
go.
Very, very much.
Thank you.
I know that this is getting worse in.
Thank you, Sharon.
I mean, sure, cabinet doors in